We're three big stories in a blockbuster edition of us.
Nancy Pelosi trades. Is this every single trade that Nancy Pelosi does? Or like when this says 171 total trades, has she only traded 171 times in the past 10 years? Or click on a trade for more data. I need to figure. The problem with all of these websites is what they do is they they pick and choose like which trades to record. Like the big issue with the study that came out was I think they picked like the top 50, or I say study, it was some big paper that everybody drew on, but they picked like the top 50 traders and then they built like a synthetic portfolio out of just like trades that and it was just like the dumbest way of trying to make a claim ever. I don't know how this website like collects the trades that it talks about or what. Yeah, because I mean, obviously looking at this, if your trading strategy has outperformed, it says plus 802% gains as opposed to the S&P 500 doing 223%. Obviously, that's massive. But I wonder what the time frame is and what the how they're figuring out which trades they're tracking are. Why am I? Police shoot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back. Why was this linked to me? This is so true. Please read my donor YouTube chat. Yes, I see it. Ryan McBeth made a great video on the military industrial complex exposing the gotcha. I don't take donors and watch videos, okay? But I'm sure it was a great video. I'm sure it's great. Okay. I don't understand this guy in chat. This cinema guy in chat said unions in Norway are not a requirement. I thought that that's what these sector level agreements coordinate on. That they basically say that like we are negotiating things for literally the entire, like you have like every single employer and every single employee are compensated the exact same, and you basically have to join like the union. Like you can't work for a company and get paid less than whatever the union negotiates. Or I think wages apply to people not part of the union. Oh sure, okay, that might be it. But I feel like that gets at the same point that like whatever the union negotiates is. Okay, so you might not have to be a part of the union, but whatever the union negotiates sets the collective bargaining agreement for the entire industry. But in the United States, you don't have to do that. Like, if you're not part of a union, like an employer can pay you whatever the fuck they want. Like, that would be a law that would have to change in the U.S. for this type of collective bargaining to work. What is this? Why I got an email about Dan talking about changing the Dali ban. What is this? Did he talk about this on stream yesterday or something? Okay, we're finishing this. Take a deep breath. Be bored. We're halfway through our MacroEcon memes for this class.
So we get 312. And it's obvious here that real GDP is growing less than nominal GDP. Why is that? Well, because this economy has inflation. Prices are rising over time. And we want to remove that when we want to look at the real concept. The real concept removes the price effect. There are times in which you don't want to remove all that price effect. And it happens a lot, for example, in computers, because sometimes the increase in the price of the computer is simply because the computer is better, and you want to correct for quality and so on. But again, that's not something you need to worry about in this course. Okay. Maybe some of you are deciding the pace at which you want me to move. I'm really puzzled by this stuff. You know, here this is from the book, and you see what happened in the US with nominal and real GDP with base year 2012. So as I said before, these two curves, one is nominal GDP, the red line, the blue line is real GDP. We're using base year 2012, so at that point they have to be the same. And what you see very, very clearly there is that the blue line, real GDP, is flatter than the red line. Why is that? Why is the, yeah?
Real GDP could grow slower because nominal GDP, I mean, this particular market probably there's inflation.
There's inflation, see. Yeah, by the way, I do have a reference for you, so ask me after the, okay, good. Anyway, so yeah, in the US between 1960 and 2018, real nominal GDP increased by a factor of 38, while real GDP by a factor of 5.7. Big difference. So you better be careful when you look at GDP that you are removing inflation, especially in, I mean, if you were to look in Argentina, These guys have had a recession, a chronic recession for a long time, big recessions, but nominal GDP is exploding because they have 10,000% inflation. So it makes a big difference, especially over time.
Okay.
This is just so you get the picture, the complete picture for the US. This is GDP growth in the US since we have national accounts. Okay? And some noticeable things, well, again, recessions. This was a big recession. Remember, we call this the Great Recession. Big recession. And, well, this is COVID. And then this is 2020. And then they bounce back in 2021 when we reopen the economy, big growth. But that's very anomalous. I mean, that's a very weird shock. Okay? But that's, you see, these are, all the shaded areas are recessions. When recessions are defined in a slightly more complicated way than that, but one sort of popular way of describing recession is as an episode where you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative.
Destiny today. There are only so many resources in a system. Also Destiny today. The economy is not a zero-sum game. Do you think that those two positions are contradictory, Hunter Smith? Like, do you really thought you were cooking there? Do you think that these are contradictory positions? You think that just because something isn't a zero-sum game means all of a sudden scarcity doesn't exist?
Negative inflation. That's not the formal definition of recession, but it's pretty close. Okay? And so that's what you have there. Another concept is unemployment rate. The unemployment rate. So that's GDP, and we're going to, in the first part of the course, we're going to worry a lot about that. We're going to build a model on how to find equilibrium GDP, okay? And we're going to see what happens with fiscal policy, with monetary policy, how does equilibrium GDP, macroeconomic output, changes with different forms of policies, or when consumers get scared, or stuff like that, okay? What about the unemployment rate? The unemployment rate is not something we want to worry a lot about until the second part of the course, after quiz 1, but still I want to get over with these definitions. So what is employment? It's the number of people who have a job. That's easy. Unemployment is slightly less easy because it's, first of all, obviously to be unemployed, you cannot have a job. So, but it's not enough that you don't have a job. It's an unemployed person is somebody that doesn't have a job and is looking for one. Okay? And not all unemployed people look for a job. Or not all non-employed people are looking for jobs. Okay? So to be unemployed, you need to not have a job and be looking for one. The labor force, what we call the labor force, is the sum of those two groups, the employed and the unemployed that would like to get a job. Okay? The unemployment rate, which is something I showed you in the previous lecture, is just a ratio of these two concepts, the unemployed over the labor force. Notice, over the labor force, not population, the labor force, which is the sum of the employed and those that are unemployed, that do not have a job and are looking for a job. Okay? How is unemployment measured? In the US, it's mostly a survey, and I have the info there. It's called the CPS, the Current Population Survey, that consults lots of households, and they ask them about their employment status, whether they have been looking for a job over the last 2 weeks or not, and so on. And that's the way we come up with a number. As I said before, those that do not have a job but are not looking for a job, they haven't been looking for a job in the last 2 weeks, are called not in the labor force. That's what we say. Now, these concepts are between unemployed and not in the labor force is not that clear. We look at the unemployment rate, but we also tend to look at those people as well, because many people are simply discouraged. They would like to get a job, but they have been looking for a while, and they haven't found it. And it happens that there is a lot more discouraged workers during recessions. When you're having a big recession, it's very difficult to find a job. So it's very easy to get discouraged. And so that's the reason we look at broader measures of non-employment than the typical unemployment rate, because a lot of those not in the labor force. People that do not have a job and are not looking for a job are really discouraged. They just gave up after a while, okay? The participation rate, and that's a very important concept, it's something you would have ignored most of the time, is very critical at this moment. The participation rate is the ratio of the labor force to the total population of working age. And you exclude people, in prison and stuff like that. So it's labor force, which is the sum of the employed and the unemployed, divided by those that could work in principle. Okay? And that's what we call the participation rate. How do these numbers look? I showed you this picture in the previous lecture, and that's the unemployment rate. It skyrocketed during COVID, but it has declined enormously. And as I said in the previous lecture, a big issue is that the unemployment rate today is extremely low. We haven't seen levels like this since the early 60s. Okay? The unemployment rate today is at record low levels. And that's a problem. It sounds wonderful, but it's also a problem because we have an inflation problem, and those two things are connected, as you will learn later on in the course. Okay? But that's what we have right now. That's the unemployment rate. Now, the reason the unemployment rate is so low, there are two reasons really. One is that there was lots of stimulus policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, so aggregate demand, and consumers that were fed up of being locked out of restaurants and trips and so on for 2 years, decided to travel and so on. And they had lots of savings. The US consumer accumulated excess saving of $2.7 trillion, and now they're spending the stuff. China, a big reason why people expect a big bounce back is because they also had a lot of savings because they were locked up for quite some time. So as a result of that, there's lots of demand for goods, and as you're going to learn in the next lecture, that means lots of output as well. But the second reason is the following. It's the participation rate. Okay? People haven't come back to work in the magnitudes that we expected. So that's the participation rate in the US. Remember, participation rate is labor force over all those that could work in principle. Okay? What do you think is this? Look at the participation rate. Used to be in the 60s, below 60s, and then there was a big rise in the participation rate in the US. What do you think is this due to?
Women joining the workforce.
Women, yeah, joining the workforce. That's what it did. Okay, that's that. Since then, since just women did all that they had to do, sort of we have been declining, and that's an issue. But look at what happened here. Lots of people exited the labor force during COVID. I mean, they have to take care of the kids or the elderly, and so people withdrew from the labor force. They didn't want a job. It was also discouraging. It was very difficult to get a job you work in a restaurant, it was impossible to get a job in a restaurant. But everyone expected this to recover to the previous level, and it hasn't. Okay? So you see that the participation rate has not come back to the levels pre-COVID. It's substantially below. And that's one of the reasons, that restaurants complain that they don't have workers and so on and so forth, is that many people haven't come back to the labor force. We thought this was going to be temporary. Now there's a concern that a lot of that is really permanent. People decided that, life at home wasn't that bad after all. Less income, but they spend more time with the kids or whatever. And so, and that's an issue. And that's a big reason behind the low unemployment rate, and the fact that we have all this inflation has to do with everyone, in particular the Fed, miscalculated the bounce back of the participation rate. Okay. Good. So as I said before, we're not going to look at labor market issues until sort of the second part of the course, after quiz 1. And the same is for inflation. We're not going to look at inflation issues until the second part of the course, because to connect them, they are connected, and we're not going to look at labor markets until sort of 8 lectures from now or so. Okay? But let's look at, but this is an important variable and certainly something you're facing every single day in the newspapers and so on, the inflation rate. So by inflation, when you hear inflation, that typically means the sustained rise in the general level of prices. So it's not that the price of cars went up relative to the price of hotels, or now down relative to the price of hotels, is that on average, prices are rising. That's what we call an inflation. No? So we're going to call the price level PT. And there are many different price levels, as you see. So the inflation rate, when you hear the inflation rate, is there...
Are you going to do the problem sets and quizzes on stream too? I don't think they have any for this, do they? I think it's just like lecture. Oh, there are problem sets. Oh, fuck. Maybe we'll look at it after.
Rate of change of that price level. An episode of deflation, the opposite of what we're experiencing now, where we're experiencing inflation, is when that inflation rate is negative. Japan, most prominently, has experienced something like that, not now, but experienced it for on and off for the last 3 decades or so. So what is the price level? There are many ways of defining it, and there are many different price levels. A very popular one is what is called the GDP deflator, and it's the one you see it's never mentioned in the newspapers, okay? But we economists tend to look at the deflator. The deflator is nothing else than the ratio of nominal GDP to real GDP. Another one is far more popular and more relevant for you as consumers.
Okay. Everybody has a different way of learning a thing, and I understand that, and that's fine. I feel like at this point, I feel like Destiny would benefit way more from being able to ask questions to a professor in office hours with them rather than just the lectures. Okay. I think that sometimes if you understand a lot of concepts of a thing, it's tempting to just get a few more things and then go to the next level. And you might be able to get away with that sometimes, but generally if I have a few concepts of a thing, and I don't know if I've learned anything new yet, okay? I don't know how much new stuff I'll learn to this. But for me, I like to go back and then start from the very beginning and then get like a whole foundational thing and then plug in things that I know to the new paradigm that's being given to me and the new ground up foundation that's being laid, okay? So just because I know some things, or you might know something, if you don't watch it, just don't watch it, okay? But I have far more desire to go back and learn it formally and then plug in the things that I do know and provide more context to them rather than just jumping to the next thing because I know a lot of these concepts already, okay? Destiny, I'm just saying you likely know 90% of the basics being taught here, or am I wrong? I don't know if I know them because I've never taken a formal macroecon course. I have no clue. So far, I think I've known every concept. I've never thought about different ways to account for GDP before, though. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different things in here that, oh, maybe I've like thought about this, but I don't have like the formal concept. So there's literally no reason. If you want to just like learn some things, then jump to the next thing, then do that. That's fine. I would like to go back, and it's more fun for me, and it's more rewarding for me to slot them into a more fleshed out thing, okay? Okay. Is it possible to shrink the camera? I don't know if there's a way to just expand this to just be this and not... Actually, you know what?
For you as
there you go.
Consumers is what we call the Consumer Price Index. That's the CPI. Okay, so here's to real GDP. Another one is far more popular and more relevant for you as consumers is what we call the Consumer Price Index. That's the CPI. Okay, so here's CPI. That's what it is. So you calculate the rate of inflation from the CPI. You calculate it the same way, but you use the CPI there instead of the GDP deflator. Now, it turns out that, I'm obviously confused with this. It turns out that these two measures are sort of pretty well aligned. Okay? There are differences that may be interesting at some specific point in time, but they tell you more or less the same picture. In particular, there is absolutely no doubt that we have an inflation problem these days. You can be as selective as you want with the price index you want to use, and people are getting very selective. Now we have CPI excluding...
housing or rent or whatever?
Well, one thing that makes a lot of sense is to exclude the most volatile goods. So typically the CPI, we use what's called core CPI, which removes energy and food, which are very
okay.
volatile prices. You don't want the thing to be moving on.
I think we looked at one. It was like CPI minus housing cost, but there are different CPIs that exclude like different things that you might buy. Yeah.
Of the place. But now we're also beginning to remove shelter, because shelter inflation is very high and sticky and so on. So people can get to be very selective. But no matter how you look at the thing, we have a problem. Okay, there's no way around that. So that's the way it looks. Again, we're going to talk a lot about this problem, of course. But we need to build tools, and we're going to get there in about 9 lectures from now. Okay, 9 lectures from now, we're going to be able to talk about what is going on with malls. I mean, you can talk whenever you want, but with malls. Okay, so those are the concepts I wanted to discuss today. Those are the definitions. I'm relieved that we got over this stuff. Let me just show you, we have 5 minutes or so, equivalent numbers for other places around the world. That's China, okay? That's China. That's GDP growth for China. And there are several things that you can see from this GDP series. The first is that it was very high. These numbers look a lot, on average, it's a lot higher than the US. When I show you the US, the rate of growth was moving around 2%, 1.5%, blah, 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 occasionally recessions and so on. This is China. Look, you had, numbers like 10% or so. That's interesting. We want to know why is that you can have so much difference in different countries. Okay, and that's what we're going to do in the third part of the course. When we look at growth, we're going to look at these kind of factors. What can give you sustained rate of growth? Sustained, I mean, for a long period of time, higher than in another country. The main factor, just to preview what will happen, is simply that China was a lot poorer than the US at the beginning. And when you're poorer and you put your act together, you can grow a lot faster than the rest. Now, China is slowing down. Aside from COVID, it's very clear for quite some time that they have been worried because clearly GDP growth is declining. Okay? And they're terrified about that. And many of the things that are happening with China have to do with the fear associated to a slowdown in the rate of growth when they are still quite poor in per capita terms. Okay? So that's a lot of what happens in China has to do with that. If you look at Japan, look at Japan. Japan also grew very fast in the 60s. Okay? You see this very fast rate of growth. Then it began to slow down, and boom, here it collapsed. They have a massive crash in financial markets, equities and land. The price of land was enormous in Japan at this time. They had a big financial bubble. For those of you that know Japan, or if you don't know, it doesn't matter, there's the Imperial Park in Tokyo, which is a park that is much smaller than Central Park or whatever. The value of that land at some point in time was the same as the value of the entire state of California. Okay, that's the order of magnitude. It was not for sale, but in terms of location times price. But that bubble crashed, and since then, Japan has never been able to recover its mojo. Okay, it has been sort of growing at a very low rate for a very long period of time. And one of the things that scares China is that this may happen to them. Because this happened to Japan when they were already quite rich. Japan was pretty poor after the war, naturally. Then they grew very fast in the 60s. But then they had this issue, financial bubble and so on. They crashed and had never been able to recover. And China is worried that, that this slowdown happens to them before they have reached sort of the level of income per capita that Japan reached when that happened. There are common factors behind the two of them as well, demographic factors. Demographics are very negative for both of them, which naturally will slow down the rate of growth. We're going to look at that later on. This is inflation in Japan. You see, sort of most countries had high inflation around there because the price of oil, they had massive oil shocks and so on. So inflation was pretty high. But the problem of Japan has been the opposite. Since the bubble crash in the late 80s, early 90s, they have had very low inflation, even deflation. And that's been a big problem. Part of the reason why they have had so low growth is because they have been in this deflationary trap. And then something you will look at later on in the course, when you have deflation, it's very difficult to use monetary policy to get out of a recession, and that's the reason they keep getting stuck there. So that's all I wanted to say for today, and I'm relieved again that this lecture is behind us. In the next lecture, we're going to introduce the first model. What we're going to look at is how to determine equilibrium GDP, and how that depends on a variety of things, including fiscal policy, not monetary policy, that will happen later, but how scared you are, consumers' preferences and fears, and so on. So that's the plan. So unless there are any questions about this, no? So see you next Monday.
Wow. How are you supposed to know when the problem sets and the quizzes are? Does he tell you when you're supposed to do them? He might say during the lectures? Yeah, he probably does. Okay. First quiz is after lecture 10. Second quiz is after lecture 18. Problem sets are mandatory. They're due each Friday. I imagine, I'm sure he'll tell us when we have to do them, right? He'll tell us. He'll let us know. Because there's only 8 problem sets, right? So I imagine it probably starts some, yeah. There's 2 different ways you can calculate inflation. One is by sticking a balloon in my dick and blowing it up, and the other is by sticking a pump in my balls and blowing them up. Actually, wait. We'll do one Federalist paper in between. A lot of professors do not tell you to do the homework. They just expect you to do it, and you have to check the syllabus. I don't think the syllabus said when we have to do it. Did it? Lecture, 2 sessions a week, 1 hour session. Recitation, 1 session a week, 1 hour session. No prereqs. Reading, 1 primary text. Copy additional reading material. Evaluations, problem sets, and quizzes. The course grade will be based on 8 problem sets and 3 quizzes. Each quiz will count for 25% of the class grade. A combined problem set grade will be accounted, or will account for the remaining 20% of the class. Problem sets are mandatory. Problem sets are due each Friday, and they'll be reviewed in recitation that Friday afternoon. Your overall problem set grade will be determined by driving the lowest policy at some flexibility in managing commitments such as job interviews that may cause blah, blah, blah. Any request for excuse waivers for problem sets must be submitted to the head TA at least 1 week prior to the problem set deadline. It's every 2 lectures? How? There's 8 problem sets, and there are 25... Oh, these are quiz reviews. Okay, and there are 22 lectures. Just look at the first one and see if it's stuff we've covered. Download and plot the series of U.S. real gross domestic product at a quarterly frequency from the earliest available date to the last available date. What is the fourth quarter of 2021 real GDP? Oh, wait, have we done all this? Question 2, measuring nominal and real GDP. Question 3, the goods market. Oh, we haven't done this one yet. Okay, so the goods market, I think we do lecture 3. So lecture 1 probably just didn't count because it was an intro. Maybe. Okay. So we'll do it after the next lecture. Okay, reading Federalist number 17. Good luck. Are you enrolled in this? No. The same subject continued, the insufficiency of the present confederation to preserve the Union. An objection of a nature different from that which has been stated and answered in my last address may perhaps be likewise urged against the principle of legislation for the individual citizens of America. Against the principle of legislation, okay. It may be said that it would tend to render the government of the Union too powerful. Oh, and the last one he talked a lot about how the federal government should be able to make laws and rules that apply to the ordinary citizens of the states, basically, right? It may be said that it would tend to render the government of the Union too powerful and to enable it to absorb those residuary authorities which it might be judged proper to leave with the states for local purposes, allowing the utmost latitude to the love of power which any reasonable man can require. I confess I am at a loss to discover what temptation the persons entrusted with the administration of the general government could ever feel to divest the states of the authorities of that description. The regulation of the mere domestic police of a state appears to me to hold out slender allurements to ambition. Commerce, finance, negotiation, and war seem to comprehend all the objects which have charms for minds governed by that passion, and all the powers necessary to those objects ought, in the first instance, to be lodged in the national depository. So he's saying things that states are interested in, why would the federal government care? Things that the federal government is interested in, the federal government naturally care about. So commerce, finance, negotiation, and war, these seem to be things that a federal government would love to deal with, and so they will deal with it. But like, would the federal government care about divesting a state from like police? Why would the federal government have an interest in that? The administration of private justice between the citizens of the same state, the supervision of agriculture and of other concerns of a similar nature, all those things, in short, which are proper to be provided for by local legislation, can never be desirable cares of a general jurisdiction. It is therefore improbable that there should exist a disposition in the federal councils to usurp the powers with which they are connected, because the attempt to exercise those powers would be as troublesome as it would be nugatory. And the possession of them, for that reason, would contribute nothing to the dignity, to the importance, or to the splendor of the national government. So this prediction is pretty wrong, but Hamilton argues that a federal government would simply have no desire to be in control of things state governments are more easily in control of, citing agriculture and policing powers as examples. But let it be admitted for argument's sake that mere wantonness and lust of domination would be sufficient to beget that disposition. Still, it may be safely affirmed that the sense of the constituent body of the national representatives, or, in other words, the people of the several states, would control the indulgence of so extravagant an appetite. So he's saying the representatives, the people in Congress, would control the federal government and not be wacky and wild when it comes to that. It will always be far more easy for the state governments to encroach upon the national authorities than for the national government to encroach upon the state authorities. this is probably just wrong. I think history has shown us right. The proof of this proposition turns upon the greater degree of influence which the state governments, if they administer their affairs with uprightness and prudence, will generally possess over the people, a circumstance which at the same time teaches us that there is an inherent and intrinsic weakness in all federal constitutions, and that too much pains cannot be taken in their organization to give them all the force which is compatible with the principles of liberty. The superiority of influence in favor of the particular governments would result partly from the diffusive construction of the national government, but chiefly from the nature of the objects to which the attention of the state administrations would be directed. Again, that states would just, the things that states are interested in, their governments would be more naturally suited to deal with. The federal government can't do fuck all, I guess. And shouldn't do fuck all, and wouldn't want to do fuck all. It is a known fact in human nature that its affections are commonly weak in proportion to the distance or diffusiveness of the object. Upon the same principle that a man is more attached to his family than to his neighborhood than to the community at large, the people of each state would be apt to feel stronger bias towards their local governments than towards the government of the Union, unless the force of that principle should be destroyed by a much better administration of the latter. The strong propensity of the human heart would find powerful auxiliaries in the objects of state regulation. The variety of more minute interests. One thing that's probably changing this a lot too is like the advent of like radio, TV, and then internet obviously makes us feel much more connected to each other and then gives us a much stronger opinion about federal matters than it would about like state matters as well, right? Which is why a lot of this ends up being not the way that it turned out to be, right? The variety of more minute interests, which will necessarily fall under the superintendence of the local administrations, and which will form so many rivulets of influence running through every part of the society, cannot be particularized without involving a detail too tedious and uninteresting to compensate for the instruction it might afford. There is one, this is saying that like, if the federal government wanted to control some state affair, it would be like, so that to do this would just be so particularized, it wouldn't even be worth it. The federal government wouldn't have an interest or whatever, right? Or is what his argument would be. There is one transcendent advantage belonging to the province of the state governments, which alone suffices to place the matter in a clear and satisfactory light. I mean the ordinary administration of criminal and civil justice. This, of all others, is the most powerful, most universal, and most attractive source of popular obedience and attachment. It is that which, being the immediate and visible guardian of life and property, having its benefits and its terrors in constant activity before the public eye, regulating all those personal interests and familiar concerns to which the sensibility of individuals is more immediately awake, contributes, more than any other circumstance, to impressing upon the minds of the people affection, esteem, and reverence towards the government. This great cement of society, which will diffuse itself almost wholly through the channels of the particular governments, independent of all other causes of influence, would ensure them so decided an empire over their respective citizens as to render them at all times a complete counterpoise and, not unfrequently, dangerous rivals to the power of the Union. He argues that the existence of individual judicial systems across each state would impress upon the individual citizens how important and relevant their own state governments are when it comes to administering to the states for state issues. The operations of the national government, on the other hand, falling less immediately under the observation of the mass of the citizens, the benefits derived from it will chiefly be perceived and attended to by speculative men. Relating to more general interests, they will be less apt to come home to the feelings of the people and, in proportion, less likely to inspire an habitual sense of obligation and an active sentiment of attachment. The reasoning on this head has been abundantly exemplified by the experience of all federal constitutions with which we are acquainted and of all others which have borne the least analogy to them. Though the ancient feudal systems were not, strictly speaking, confederacies, yet they partook of the nature of that species of association. There was a common head, chieftain, or sovereign whose authority extended over the whole nation, and a number of subordinate vassals, or feudatories, who had large portions of land allotted to them, and numerous trains of inferior vassals, or retainers, who occupied and cultivated that land upon the tenure of fealty or obedience to the persons of whom they held it. Each principal vassal was a kind of sovereign within his particular domain. Is it this word right?
Domain.
Domain. The consequences of this situation were a continual opposition to authority of the sovereign and frequent wars between the great barons or chief feudatories themselves. The power of the head of the nation was commonly too weak, either to preserve the public peace or to protect the people against the oppressions of their immediate lords. This period of European affairs is emphatically styled by historians the times of feudal anarchy. When the sovereign happened to be a man of vigorous and warlike temper and of superior abilities, he would acquire a personal weight and influence which answered, for the time, the purpose of a more regular authority. But, in general, the power of the barons triumphed over that of the prince, and in many instances his dominion was entirely thrown off, and the great fiefs were erected into independent principalities or states. In those instances in which the monarch finally prevailed over the vassals, his success was chiefly owing to the tyranny of those vassals over their dependents. The barons or nobles, equally the enemies of the sovereign and the oppressors of the common people, were dreaded and detested by both, till mutual danger and mutual interest effected a union between them fatal to the power of the aristocracy. Had the nobles, by a conduct of clemency and justice, preserved the fidelity and devotion of their retainers and followers, the contest between them and the prince must almost always have ended in their favor, and the abridgment or subversion of the royal authority. So basically saying that, like, you might have had a prince or a king, but, like, ultimately the power was exerted on by individuals, by people that were more closely, like, literally in geography to the people, right? This is not an assertion founded merely in speculation or conjecture. Among other illustrations of its truth which might be cited, Scotland will furnish a cogent example. The spirit of clanship which was, at an early day, introduced into that kingdom, uniting the nobles and their dependents by ties equivalent to those of kindred, rendered the aristocracy a constant overmatch for the power of the monarch. Till the incorporation, with England subdued its fierce and ungovernable spirit and reduced it within those rules of subordination which a more rational and more energetic system of civil polity had previously established in the latter kingdom. The separate governments in a confederacy may aptly be compared with the feudal baronies, with this advantage in their favor that from the reasons already explained, they will generally possess the confidence and goodwill of the people, and with so important a support will be able effectually to oppose all encroachments of the national government. It will be well if they are not able to counteract its legitimate and necessary authority. It will be, okay. The points of similitude, similarities, consist in the rivalship of power applicable to both and in the concentration of large portions of the strength of the community into particular deposits, in one case at the disposal of individuals, in the other case at the disposal of political bodies. A concise review of the events that have attended Confederate governments will further illustrate this important doctrine, and inattention to which has been the great source of our political mistakes and has given our jealousy a direction to the wrong side. This review shall form the subject of some ensuing papers. Okay. So this is an argument that state governments would never cede power to a federal government because naturally people wouldn't even trust the federal government. It's further away. State governments, like feudal lords, are always more likely to control the people and the people to like give its power to the local feudal stuff or the local vassal stuff as opposed to a strong federal government or whatever, naturally speaking. But okay. No quotes from this one. Well, okay. Lecture guy. Hold on, let me get a sippy soy. Wait, you skipped lecture 2? No, we watched both. We watched 1 and 2 yesterday. We have lecture 3 now. 1 second. Quick question. Did the Federalists assume a lot during their writings? I feel like most of this is just, this will never happen. So when governments are intentionally created by wise men, what they do is they look into the past to say, well, these are the things that have happened, and these are the lessons that we can learn, and then this is the government that we should construct so that we don't run into these issues of the past, so that we can have like the good things of prior governments and avoid the bad things of prior governments. So that's basically what they're doing. Because for all of Glenn Beck citing like the Declaration of Independence, like the Declaration of Independence, in my not well historically educated view, was not really a big deal. A lot of people declared independence and fought against fucking people that they didn't like and got their independence, but who cares? Like the Declaration of Independence, you know, got us independence, but like from that came, afterwards we got like the Articles of Confederation, which sucked. It was truly the Constitutional Convention, the deliberation of a lot of men, reflecting upon history, and then the intentional construction of a functional government that gave us the United States of America, not the fucking Declaration of shit dependence. Who the fuck cares? You rebelled and won. Like, why did the Articles suck? The Articles of Confederation sucked because those basically did say, hey, listen, here's like some rules for all of us to play by, and please follow them. But there was like no enforcement power behind anything. So if you just like, it just didn't didn't create a strong enough federal centralized government.
Okay, let's start. So what you have there in that picture is the result of a survey to a bunch of economists which are asked to assess the probability that there is a recession within the next 12 months. Recession means essentially a decline in aggregate output. And well, the first thing to notice here is that, you know, it's not very good news. There is a very high chances, at least according to this expert, that the US enters a recession within the next 12 months or so. Pretty high probability. You can see that number typically is very, very low, and it goes very high, sort of next to recessions. And now we're not in a recession, but there's a sort of very high perceived probability that we may go into recession in the near future. So how is that these people come up with this forecast? Well, at some level, either explicitly or implicitly, they must have some model of the determination of equilibrium output. You know, they need to understand, they need to see certain things that suggest, once you go through a model, that output will decline.
What is he saying? I'm so sorry. What is he? Once you go through a mole? I've heard this word like 20 times and I haven't. I just assumed I'd be able to figure out, but I don't know. I still don't know. Once you go through what? What is he saying? Oh, model. Once you go through a model. Okay.
Once you go through a model, that output will decline. So that's what we're going to start doing today. And in fact, that's what we're going to do throughout this course. We're going to try to find ever more complex, perhaps, or richer models of output determination, aggregate output determination. So that's essentially what this course is about. And so in understanding, sort of, we're going to try to understand what is it that drives that equilibrium output, and how is it that we get to one specific level of output. That's what it means to find the equilibrium level of output. And we're going to do it sort of in 3 stages. In the first part of the course, that is up to quiz 1, we're going to focus on the very short run, how output is determined in the very short run, say within a year or so, or a little more even, but that type of time frame. Then we're going to focus on the medium run. That's sort of at the beginning of the second part of the course. And by the medium run, simply we're going to mean by the time in which prices begin to adjust sufficiently. Okay? Before that, is most of the action happens in quantities. There is little movement in goods prices. There's lots of movement in asset prices, but little movement in goods prices. And in the last part of the course, we're going to look at how output is determined over the long run, which is quite different from how output is determined in the short run. The determination of output in the short run is what we mostly mean by business cycle analysis, okay? And short run, medium run, the way we're going to find it here, is what we mean by business cycle. The country's in a recession, it's in a boom, it's an expansion. Those are all terminologies of the short run or short or medium run. The determination of equilibrium output in the long run is when we think about growth. When we talk about why is it China grows faster than the US today, well, that's a question not about the business cycle, it's a question about the long-run determinants of output growth, okay? And there are even different class of models. In more advanced models, if you were doing a PhD, those things are a lot closer to each other. But in this course, they're going to be very different type of models. It's easier to analyze these things with different type of models than trying to integrate all in one big machine, okay? But let's start with the simple part. In the short run, the key mechanism, something that will keep showing up in all the models and submodels we analyze in the first 8 lectures or so, or 7 lectures, or the next 7 lectures or so, is this mechanism. In the very short run, output, that is equilibrium output, the thing that these economists are forecasting that will decline in the next within the next 12 months, is determined primarily by what we call demand, okay? So demand will determine output. So with a change in demand, that will change production. But when production changes, that will also change income. That you know from national accounts. Remember, we said that we could measure output from the production side, but we also measure the income side, and they're exactly the same. More production, somebody has to receive the proceeds of that, workers and owners, capital owners, the government, whatever. But so changes so the second step is when those changes in production that were brought about by the changes in demand will lead to a change in income. But when income changes, that will change demand again, and so on and so forth, okay? So that's essentially, that's quintessential short-run macro, is to try to understand this aggregate demand, because that's the main driver, and then how it gets multiplied in the short run, okay? And in this lecture, we're going to talk just about that, or primarily about that, okay? But that's when, so when I mean short-run macro, that's the structure I have in mind, and that's the structure most people have in mind. Something where aggregate demand will determine that. That's the reason why in the short run, you worry a lot about whether consumer confidence is high or low. That's demand. If consumers are very depressed, that tends to reduce demand. If consumers are very bullish, that will tend to increase demand. And since in the short run, output is determined by demand, the business cycle, whether we have a recession or not, depends a lot on how demand feels. So if somebody is forecasting a recession within the next 12 months, is forecasting really that demand will decline within the next 12 months, okay? Why they're forecasting that, that's something we're going to learn in the steps as we go through the course. What are the kind of things they may be thinking about? What are the drags on aggregate demand that are likely to depress demand, and so on and so forth. But that we'll get there, okay? Anyways, first let me tell you about the components of aggregate demand. The first and one of the largest component of aggregate demand is consumption, okay? And when I mean aggregate demand, okay, I'll pause for a slide. Let me go over the definition. Consumption, we're going to note by C, is the goods and service purchased by consumers, okay? Households and so on. Investment, which we're going to note by I, is the sum of non-residential and residential investment. So equipment and factories on one side, and then residential investment is houses, stuff like that, apartment buildings and so on. Which is also, these are goods and services as well. There's just capital goods and so on, but they're also goods and services. Government spending, that's what we're going to denote by G, are purchase of goods and services by the federal, state, and local government, okay? Excluding, that's important, government transfers. What is a government transfer? Many of you may have received that during COVID. You know, the government sent you a check, for example, okay? Well, that check is not part of government expenditure. That check is like it's a negative tax, and it's going to enter somewhere else. When we mean government expenditure is things the government purchases, services the government acquires, and so on, okay? Then exports, X, which will play no role until 7 lectures, 8 lectures from now, or actually 10 lectures from now probably, is purchase of US goods and services, that is, goods produced by US factories by foreigners. Okay? IM is the other side of the story. Imports is the purchase of foreign goods and services by US consumers, US firms, US government. Okay? So when you buy something that is produced in Germany, well, that's an import. When the Germans buy something that is produced in the US, that's an export. Okay? And then the last component is something we're not going to pay any attention whatsoever in this course, which is inventory investment. And inventory investment is certainly, it's almost accidental. There is some planning on it, but there is a lot of, it's just when there's difference between sales and production. And over the very short run, there's lots of differences. I mean, you know.
I forget, is buying stock added? Is that like part of GDP? Does stock buying get added to GDP? No, it doesn't. Okay. All right.
Not producing, unless you're in a bakery, you know, you're not producing and selling immediately. There is certain lags. That's a small thing. It's volatile, but it's a small thing, so we're going to ignore it for this course. We're going to assume, actually, unless we explicitly say the contrary, and that could show up in a PSET, it would never show in a quiz, because it's not that important, we're going to assume that this inventory investment is equal to 0. Also, for this part of the course, until further notice, we're going to assume that exports and imports are equal to 0 as well.
Based.
That's not realistic, but it's easier to analyze what we call a closed economy, okay? An economy that is not interacting with the rest of the world. Again, 10 lectures from now, we're going to open the economy to the rest of the world, and then we're going to have to talk about things like import, exports, exchange rates, things of that kind. But for now, let's keep it simple, okay? So now, you get a sense, this is for 2018, but I mean, the totals change, but the composition doesn't change very much, of GDP, okay, of GDP.
So Y is total GDP. C is consumption, so purchasing of goods and services. I is investment, so purchasing of like capital things, which I think is like machinery, trucks. Residential means houses, I'm guessing, is residential investment. Government spending is how much money the government is spending on things, absent transfers of wealth, like depositing money in people's accounts or whatever. And then exports, imports, we're not worried about yet, and inventory investment, we're not worried about yet, I think. Okay.
Output, aggregate demand, they're all the same in equilibrium, but we'll get there. In GDP, you see that consumption accounts for a big chunk, close to 70% of aggregate demand. That's the reason people worry so much about consumer sentiment and so on. The University of Michigan has many claims to fame, but one of them is they produce this index of consumer sentiment, and everyone is watching that thing. Anyone that worries about macro or finance is watching that thing because it tells you a lot about one of the main drivers of output, equilibrium output. Then you see investment. It's substantially smaller, but it's large, in particular non-residential investment. Government expenditure is a big component of aggregate demand. And then I'm not going to worry too much about, for a country like the US, the openness part is relatively small. If you go to a small economy, typically will have sort of very large exports relative to GDP and so on, but that's not the case of the US. And there you see why we're going to set inventory investment to 0. It's a small thing. It moves a lot more than its size, so it can account for fluctuations at sort of the monthly level of GDP, but it's not that important in a slightly longer period of time. Okay, so that's more or less the story. So now this is the model. Please stop me is there anything here you don't understand, because everything that will build from here to quiz 1 will build on understanding this, what I'm about to say. Very simple. But if you miss a step here, everything is going to be confusing in the next few lectures. So
this is the part where like half the students are all looking at each other because they don't understand, but they're waiting for like one brave soul to raise their hand and be like, what's this? But then nobody does it. And the professor XD troll faces them and he's like, look at these fucking retards all looking around and nobody's asking. Then let's move the fuck on.
And you're not supposed to understand it in the first run. So it's okay that you ask me. But let's make sure that you understand what is going on here. Okay, so
aggregate demand is Z is the GDP, right? C is all of your consumption of your goods and services. I is your investment, which is your residential, non-residential capital investments. G, oh fuck, I already forgot. Okay, minus IM, wait, X is inventory management, I think. IM was your, no, IM is inventory management. X was your imports and exports. G was government spending. Okay, absent cash transfers, right? Yeah, okay.
that's aggregate demand. First definitions. We're going to denote aggregate demand by this Z, okay, letter Z. And aggregate demand is going to be, when we say aggregate demand, remember what is the exercise we're trying to do. Ultimately, what we want to determine is the output, the production of the US economy, say. So when we talk about aggregate demand, we're trying to determine the demand for domestically produced goods, for goods produced in the US.
Z is aggregate demand, yes.
That's what we're trying to pin down. And so that's the reason aggregate demand looks like that. Is, well, consumers. Consumers are going to demand goods. Investment, G, plus export. If foreigner demands US goods, that also increases US production. Minus imports, because imports is goods and services that consumers, firms, and governments sort of buy from foreigners, but they're not produced by US companies. So they are not affect the determination of equilibrium output in the US.
Oh, fuck, okay, just kidding. Wait, hold on. Listen to this again, my bad.
Imports is G. So that's the reason aggregate demand looks like that. Is, well, consumers. Consumers are going to demand goods.
Okay.
Investment, G, plus export. If foreigner demands US goods, that also increases US production.
Okay.
Minus imports, because imports is goods and services that consumers, firms, and governments sort of buy from foreigners, but they're not produced by US companies. So they are not affect the determination of equilibrium output in the US. Okay? That's the reason you subtract it.
Okay.
Now, that distinction is not going to matter until 10 lectures from now, because we're going to set X and IM equal to 0 from the point of view of modeling. So all demand is demand for domestically produced goods in this part of the course. Okay? So aggregate demand for us will be this C plus I plus G.
Yeah,
so we need to understand what determines C plus I plus G. And at least initially, we're going to keep it very, very simple. We're not going to think too much about what determines investment. In fact, we're going to assume there's a constant is given. So it's determined somewhere else, not in the model I'm about to solve. Government expenditure, the same. I'm going to assume, it's determined by some other priorities, green agendas, stuff like that. It has very little to do with what we're doing here. And then taxes is something that doesn't show up there, but it will show up very shortly. We're also going to assume that they're being determined somewhere else. In pieces and later on in the course, we're going to endogenize all that, but not now. Let's assume, I'm trying to come up with the simplest possible model of aggregate demand, and I'm making two of these terms trivial as constants. Okay? And I'm going to focus all my effort here in this component here, which I already told you is the most important component of aggregate demand, which is consumption. Okay? So we're going to assume, here we're going to have a function. Something has to move for the model to be interesting. So we're going to assume that consumption is an increasing function of disposable income. I'm about to define what disposable income is, but you can imagine what it is. It's something you can use to consume and so on. So very naturally, if you have a higher disposable income, you're going to consume more. That's what this says. Okay? In reality, that consumption function is a lot more complex. There are lots of things that enter there that we're not modeling for now. But let's start from the basics, okay? So that's going to be the only behavioral assumption we're going to make for a while, that the consumers consume more when they have more disposable income. Okay? And I'm going to make it even simpler. I'm going to assume that consumption is a linear function of this disposable income, okay? So there's going to be some constant C0, which captures lots of things that we're not modeling here. For example, the fact that for any given level of disposable income, if you're richer, suppose you have some shares, and now the shares double in value, you probably are going to consume more as well, Okay? There are lots of other things that affect consumption which are different from, aside from your disposable income. But we're not going to model that. So we're going to call it autonomous. Autonomous in the sense that we're not going to determine it here. We're going to take it as a parameter that comes from somewhere else. We may do some experiments moving that variable around, but it's not going to be part of what we model. C1 is a more interesting parameter for this part of the course, and it's what we call the marginal propensity to consume.
Wow.
Out of disposable income in this case. That is, C1 tells you the share. If you get an extra $1 of disposable income, how much of that do you spend in consumption?
Okay.
Okay? So say you get an extra $1 of income. If you spend 60 cents in the things you normally consume, of that extra $1, well, then your C1 is 0.6. Okay? That's a marginal propensity to consume. And that's what gives us C1 is 0.6. In the things you normally consume, if you spend 60 cents in the things you normally consume, of that extra $1, well, then your C1 is 0.6. Okay? That's a marginal propensity to consume. And that's what gives us our increasing function. If you get an extra $1, you're going to save part, but some of it you're going to spend.
Okay.
That part you're going to spend is the C1 that we have there. Okay? Good. Now let me tell you how we define disposable income. Disposable income is just equal to income, which is equal to production, minus taxes. That's disposable income. Okay? It's whatever you earn either as a worker or as a capital owner. Well, then the government takes something out of it. That's your disposable income, and that's where you have to decide how much to save and how much to consume. Okay. So that means that our consumption function can be written that way. After all these assumptions I've made, equal to this autonomous component plus C1, the marginal propensity to consume, times income output minus taxes.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Is it clear?
Uh-oh. Who's going to ask a question? Which student is going to be brave enough to ask a question of this? Oh, boy.
Yes?
Oh.
So all these are assumptions. Now, they're not crazy assumptions in the sense that, that we know that there is a relationship between these two things. Again, the consumption function in practice is much richer than that. And there is lots of randomness, random terms around and so on, but that's not what we're about here. But if you're going to start with a consumption function, this is a pretty reasonable one to start with. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so that's going to look in the space of disposable income, or income. I could have put income there, not disposable income. It's going to look like that. Okay? So
okay. So your total consumption C is measured by C sub 0 is being treated as a constant, and then you're adding to that C sub 1, which is the income minus the taxes you pay or whatever bullshit, right? And then that's why it goes up, I think, right?
C0 is that autonomous consumption. Is something you're going to consume regardless of your level of disposable income. I mean, there is a minimum consumption you have to have, say. And then the slope of that is the marginal propensity to consume, which is C1, which is a number between 0 and 1. Okay, so let's determine equilibrium output. One, you have to consume, or if you're going to consumption in practice. Yes.
Or is this last stupid thing? Okay.
So look in the space of disposable income, or income. I could have put income there, not disposable income. It's going to look like that. Okay? So C0 is that autonomous consumption. Is something you're going to consume regardless of your level of disposable income. I mean, there is a minimum consumption you have to have, say. And then the slope of that is the marginal propensity to consume, which is C1, which is a number between 0 and 1. Okay, so let's determine equilibrium output.
Okay.
So we have aggregate demand, which is C plus I plus G.
Okay.
There we are. That was our definition of aggregate demand. I'm going to stick in now the functional forms. Well, these guys are very boring. They're constants.
C plus I, we said was investment, capital investment. Was that right? Residential plus non-residential, and then G was government spend. Okay, and then C was consumption, and now we're plugging in our consumption function, which is C sub 0 is your constant consumption regardless of income, plus C1 is your marginal propensity to consume, which is how much of your income will you spend on consumption. And then your income is your Y minus T is the amount of money you make minus the taxes that you pay. Okay.
And I'm plugging in here the consumption function, okay? So what we have here is that aggregate demand is an increasing function of output or income, okay? It's also a function of taxes, investment, and so on, but it's an increasing function of output. And this is important because, remember, the goal of this is to find equilibrium output. So here I have, on the right-hand side of my aggregate demand, output. That's good. I have one equation in which output shows up, okay? Now, I cannot find equilibrium output just from this equation. Why is that?
Wait, what's he referring to there? I have one equation in which output shows up. Oh, wait, because income is considered output because somebody's earning something from all the stuff being produced? Is that what he means, right?
On the right-hand side of my aggregate demand, output. That's good. I have
Right-hand side of my aggregate demand, I have output, which, okay, I think. Yeah, okay.
one equation in which output shows up, okay? Now, I cannot find equilibrium output just from this equation. Why is that? So remember, we're trying to build a model to find equilibrium output. That's our goal. That's what will tell us whether we're in a
Wow, broadcast GGFF. Thanks for the host, buddy.
recession or not. Output is low, recession, output is high, boom. Obviously, I cannot solve it from this. I have two unknowns. What are my two unknowns? Two unknowns, one equation. What is my second unknown there?
Oh, where are these students at? Oh no. This poor professor, he's teaching his heart out. He's walking around, he's explaining things, he's laughing, and the students are just cringe. Somebody's going to answer. Come on. Oh.
Aggregate demand.
Thank you.
Of course. We have to determine Z and Y. Okay? So how are we going to do that? Well, using a second equation, which is the equilibrium condition. It's not a function. This is a function. This is not a function. This is an equilibrium condition. It says in equilibrium, not outside equilibrium. In equilibrium, output is equal to aggregate demand. Okay? That's what this equilibrium condition tells us. Off equilibrium, this doesn't hold. That's the reason this is not a function. This holds everywhere. It's a function. This is an equilibrium condition. It says at equilibrium, aggregate demand is equal to output. So now we're done because we have two equations and two unknowns. Okay? Good. And the reason I pause on this is that I see that mistake made often. Okay? That this is interpreted as a function. It's not. It's an equilibrium condition. At equilibrium, it holds. And that you can see, actually, I'm going to illustrate the same point in the diagram. So this is the, let me keep going. So this is clear, no? So this is just a summary of what we had in the previous slides. And this is the new thing here, which is in equilibrium, output is equal to aggregate demand. And again, that's what makes this really a short-term model. You see, I'm saying output in the short term is whatever demand wants it to be, which is different from the long run. It says, no, hold on a second. But how much output you can produce is a function of the capital you have, of the workers you have. Yeah, that's true in the long run. But in the short run, you have lots of flexibility because you have lots of unused capacity and so on. Okay? So this is it's a big assumption, and there are schools of thought within macroeconomics that split by this assumption, whether you believe that in the short run output is aggregate demand determined or not. At MIT, we tend to believe that in the short run. In the long run, no, but in the short run, that's what it does. Now, sometimes the long run gets to you very quickly. And at this point, we're in a situation like that. That's the reason we're seeing inflation and so on, but that's something you'll understand later on. Okay? But for now, so this is important. We're saying here, output, I don't need another equation. I could have done aggregate demand like this, and then output a function of capital, labor, lots of things. I'm not going to even do that. I'm going to say, no, output will be whatever demand wants it to be, okay? And that means in equilibrium, they have to be equal. Good. You had a question.
Can we draw output and GDP?
No, they are the same for us. That's a definition. GDP for us is output. So when I say aggregate output, I mean GDP. Remember? Real GDP. We're talking all about real GDP, okay? And it's also equal to income. Not disposable, but it's equal to income. Remember when we did those little tables where we look at the 3 different ways of doing it? Well, the first 2 were output, and the last one was income, and they had to be the same, okay? So why is real GDP for us? That's real GDP.
Oof, that girl is buried. She has no clue what he just said. She's like, fuck. She's like, I can't even ask a clarifying question. I didn't even understand that answer. Oh, no. These are the ones you got to hunt down at the end of class. Like, do you need a study group? I'm just kidding.
What happens in the table I show you, I already used the fact that real GDP is equal to aggregate demand, and that's the reason I show you the different components of Z. I show you that, and that. Okay? But in equilibrium, they're equal. There's really a figure that will clarify, I think, a lot of that. But let me keep solving this. So we have that. So what I'm going to do next is just solve it. So we have this equilibrium condition. I'm going to plug in my aggregate demand function here, and so I can solve out for equilibrium output. And here we have for the first time in this course, an equation for equilibrium output. There you are. That's your equilibrium output in this economy.
There you go. There you go. Oh, now it all makes sense now. It should make sense for us, though, in the short term, right? So this is the equilibrium output is Y, and Z is your demand. Is that what we were saying all your demand is? Because the demand is equal to consumption in the short term. And then we have all of our variables that we all remember.
Equation for equilibrium output. There you are. That's your equilibrium output in this economy. Okay? Now, this guy here is very famous, and it's very macro. Mm-hmm. Doesn't happen in micro. Yeah. It happens in macro.
Fuck
only.
micro.
Okay? This guy here. Another guy there is called the multiplier. Okay? And it's a very important macro concept. It's a huge concept.
Oh, shit. Oh, no. Why?
Now, why do you think it's called a multiplier?
Solving for output. Okay, Y equals this bullshit. Y equals, okay, let's find what the equilibrium level of output. The GDP, Y equals Z. Solving for output, Y yields, Y equals... Where did this 1/1 bullshit come from? Fuck me, dude. I don't fucking know. Jesus. He just fucking fucked all this shit up. The term 1 divided by 1 minus C sub 1 is known as the multiplier. Why? What happens as C sub 1 rises? So C sub 1 was that your marginal propensity to consume? So the more you're willing to consume, the closer your maximum consumption, meaning you're spending every single dollar on consumption, would asymptotically approach 1, which makes this asymptotically approach infinity or slope up to infinity or some bullshit. I don't know what the fuck. So output increases as people are more willing to spend all of their money? Is that basically?
Well, obviously it multiplies something, but a multiplier sounds like you know, that multiplies, that makes something bigger. No?
Yeah, true.
So what happens if C1 is greater than 0? What happens if C1 is greater than 0? Remember, it's between 0 and 1. But what happens if it's greater than 0? What happened with that number there, 1 over 1 minus C1? It's greater than 1. This multiplies. Okay? So that's the reason we call it a multiplier. It's nothing deep there. Okay? So this thing here is sort of autonomous stuff. You know, it's what the government spends, what firms are spending, capital. This is autonomous consumption. And this actually is a typo there. There should be a C1 in front of that.
Uh-oh.
Typo. It comes from there. C1 times T. So fix that typo, please. I'm going to upload the slides again with the typo fix. Okay?
Oh, okay. Do we have a typo fixed, or?
It comes from here, C1 times T. Okay, so that's what this does. It multiplies. So whatever it is that is happening here, whatever it is that the government is spending or whatever, these terms multiplied. And that's a huge thing. There was a big debate, almost always, when you're trying to get out of a recession and the government starts spending, a big question is, well, how big is the multiplier? If the multiplier is small, you're going to have to spend a lot to get the economy out of the recession. Mm-hmm. If the multiplier is large, then you're going to have to spend very little, and then the multiplier will take you away from that recession. So what is it that makes the multiplier large or small?
How much money people spend?
Well, mechanically, when is it that multiplier large?
When C1 is closer to 1, so when people spend more of their income on it.
True.
Exactly, when C1 is large. And that gives you the logic, and that's very important in macro, is why is that a big multiplier? Well, because think what happens in macro. The government spends. That increases output. But now output increases income. And if consumers spend a big share of their extra income in output and consumption again, then that increases output again, which increases income again, and you keep going.
Wow.
Okay? So that's the sequence. On the contrary, if consumers are very scared, they don't want to spend any extra dollar they receive, anything of the extra dollar they receive, then you don't get any multiplier, because this initial increase in output that comes from the government expansion, that does lead to increase in income, but if consumers don't spend it, it doesn't recirculate into the economy, and then you don't get a multiplier. Okay? So that's the reason we call it the multiplier.
Wow.
So that diagram is an important diagram. I'm just
oh, yeah, we got it. Thank you. I memorized it already.
In
Thank
that
you.
diagram, I'm plotting the aggregate demand function and then this equilibrium condition, output equal to aggregate demand, in the space of
demand Z, production Y. This is our production. Are these both supposed to be Y? Am I just a fucking retard? Y and Y? Or is one of these supposed to be Z? I'm assuming one of these was supposed to be Z. Okay. Autonomous spending is here. So this is money that everybody has to spend. And then this is your propensity to spend as people get more money, I guess. And then as money increases, so if you give people more and more and more money, then this production, the equilibrium point would move along here, I guess. And then this is your equilibrium point. So should you not get more money past this point? I think I understand like 48% of this. Demand. Yeah, close enough. Okay.
Aggregate demand and output, production, and income here. But remember, income is equal to production. Okay. So there's your aggregate demand, and that's your 45-degree line because this output equal to, so whatever is in this axis equal to that axis, that's the 45-degree line, okay? So that's your equilibrium conditions. It's at equilibrium, this guy here, aggregate demand, Z will have to be equal to Y. That's traced there. This is aggregate demand. Why is this line flatter than that?
Why is this line flatter than that? Production. I don't know why production is 1. Maybe he'll explain. The flatness of this line is your propensity to consume, because the slope is determined by C sub 1. So if you spent every single dollar you got, then it would be the same here. You'd have the same slope as production. I don't know why the production slope is 1 though. Is it because production equals consumption? Is that what we said? So it's always 1, I think, right? Production equals consumption, I think.
Why is aggregate demand flatter than?
Because people don't spend their entire dollar on it.
Exactly, because C1 is less than 1.
Yeah. Okay.
So the slope of the aggregate demand in this space is C1. It's the marginal propensity to consume. How much more they demand if they get an extra dollar? Well, they don't demand one extra unit, they demand C1 unit, and C1 is less than 1. Okay, so that's the reason this. So if C1 is very small, this line is going to be very flat.
And if the line is very flat, then the equilibrium market point is shifted to the left along the production curve, meaning all of your GDP would fall, I guess, right? Because you're.
C1 is very large, very high marginal to consume. This is going to be very steep, the red line. The other one doesn't change, the 45-degree line. Okay.
So the reason the economy is bad is because people save money. I'm confused. Okay. We're just taking a class. We're learning base things. Don't try to map on like the most macro concept ever to your. I didn't mean because it's a macro. Don't think about it that way. Just have more shit to learn. But also, as a side note, in general, people tend to not like savers because savings is usually really bad for the economy. I think it's part of the reason why we get into like bad traps where you have people that are saving money and then you do government stimulus and then they save money. Usually that's considered bad for the economy. Saving is not good. But there's probably more complicated reasons why that's true and untrue in the future. But
and what I said is that at equilibrium, so you see, if I take an off equilibrium level of output, say this, aggregate demand is different from output. It's only at equilibrium that these two things will hold. Okay? This function, I can plot it everywhere. But this one will hold only at equilibrium. Okay? That's when these two things are equal. So what I solve here, I just found this point. Okay? So parameters here are C0, C1 times T, and G. They're all shifters of this aggregate demand, up and down. Okay? And that point here is exactly that. And all those things are parameters in my aggregate demand. I really want you to internalize this diagram.
okay, we've got it memorized, sir.
Any questions about it?
How many people are in this class? Is it like 5 people? I feel like a loser.
Just stare at it a little bit because it's going to show up repeatedly.
Fuck.
And later on, it's not going to show up. But whenever you get confused, the way to get yourself out of that confusion is going to be to go back to the diagram.
Okay, we'll remember
You'll see.
it then.
I'll remind you when that's likely to happen.
Thank you.
Okay, so you better understand this diagram. Play with it. Move. Here, the only thing you can move around is the ZZ, the aggregate demand curve.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing is equilibrium condition. You can move that 45-degree line, but ZZ you can move it around. So let's do a few exercises. One, the most obvious.
Okay.
Suppose that C0 increases by 1 billion. Okay, so autonomous consumption, that is that level of consumption which is independent of income, goes up by 1 billion. And that could be, we're all in a better mood. Okay, disposable income is whatever it is today, But there is great expectation that the economy will enter a boom next year. And so then you feel richer and so on, and you may decide to consume, not wait until next year, you may decide to consume more today. That kind of thought experiment can be captured by a C0 type shift, go up. And that's when I talk about consumer sentiment. Well, consumer sentiment is a lot about C0. For any given level of income, well, consumers are likely to consume more than they would otherwise or less.
Okay.
And that's what C0 captures. So let's go, everything in this model, there's no dynamics in this simple model. So we immediately, what we know is, if you just were to solve the equation, and I tell you what happens to if output.
Bro, stop skipping around the slide so much.
What happens to output if C0 goes up by 1 billion, you know that output will rise by how much?
If it goes up by 1 billion, then output will rise by, I don't know, whatever the total sum of this times the multiplier bullshit is, right?
Let's keep it simple. Just staring at that equation, if I tell you autonomous consumption goes up by 1 billion, what happens to equilibrium output? Goes up by more or less than 1 billion?
By more.
Or exactly 1 billion?
By more, right? Because it's a multiplier.
Exactly, and
Good
the multiplier
job.
is greater than 1.
Hell yeah.
So we know that the output will increase by more than 1 billion.
Good job.
Will increase by 1 billion times the multiplier. If C1 is 0.5, then it will increase by $2 billion.
Damn.
Equilibrium output. Now, I'm going to get you from the 1 billion to the 2 billion in steps using the diagram. That's what I intend to do next. Okay? So, this shift here, so we're starting from this equilibrium output here. This shift here.
I love when he says here and here and we don't see him point at anything. Thank you.
Is increasing C0. That's a 1 billion. So distance A to B is 1 billion. That's because what I did is for any given level of output, I shift this aggregate demand up by 1 billion. That's autonomous consumption up. Okay? Well, because output is whatever demand wants, that immediately increases output by 1 billion. So B, the distance between B and C is also 1 billion. Okay? Demand increased by 1 billion, boom, output immediately catches up. So output increases by 1 billion. But if output increases by 1 billion, what has happened to income?
It also increases to D.
It also increased by 1 billion. Income is the same as output. So income has increased by 1 billion. Well, if income has increased by 1 billion and C1 is different from 0, that means part of that extra billion is going to be spent in consumption, second round.
Yeah.
So say C1 is 0.5, then now you get $500 million more of expenditure. But if it's of consumption, and it's $500, that's the CD. That's 500 million.
CDs.
Obviously, this C1 here is less than 0.5 because otherwise, this would be half of that, but it's not. Anyway, you get 500 million more. But if now there's 500 million more of demand, since output does whatever, production does whatever demand wants, then you get 500 more of production.
True, and then we go to the right.
And if you have 500, then you have 500 million more of
demand,
income.
yeah.
And if you have 500 more of income,
wow.
and your C1 is greater than 0, say 0.5, you're going to spend 250 million more. But 250 million more will generate $250 million of production, which also will generate $250 million more of income, which will generate 125 million more of consumption, and blah, 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 blah.
Cool.
You catch it, okay?
Gotcha.
So that's what is happening here. Boom. Yeah. From C to D. Okay. So this is the initial shift in aggregate demand up, 1 billion. That leads to 1 billion more of production as well, which means 1 billion more of income. okay? But now these consumers not only have this C0, 1 billion higher in C0, but they also have 1 billion more of income. And since they have 1 billion more income and they're going to spend part of it, C1 times that, and I assume C1 was 0.5, that's what gives me CD. That's the extra $500 million. And then that thing there is also $500 million. And then there was 250 million, 250 million, 125, 125. So.
Honest question, what level of math would be required for this class? I have no idea. So far, what would this stuff be considered? Like algebra or like to do a graph? I don't even know what you would call this. What is graphing? Which math class is that? So far, I think it's just like algebra 1, basically. Maybe, I think.
62 and a half. That's the way you get there. There's an alternative way of finding equilibrium output, which is entirely equivalent. And it's the way it was initially done, by the way. And you'll see later on a very important curve in this course will be the IS curve, which is a curve that describes all the equilibrium in goods markets. We'll get there. But the reason it's called IS is because of this alternative way of deriving the same I have derived, which is through, you can arrive to the same equilibrium by saying, look, equilibrium output is that output at which investment is equal to savings. That's the reason that curve is going to be called IS, investment equal to saving, S. So let me very quickly do it for you and then make a point and connect the two things.
Okay.
So private saving is what consumers do and so on, and firms, is just disposable income minus consumption. That's your saving, okay? So it's equal to Y minus T, that's disposable income, minus C. Government saving is T, that's disposable income, minus C. So it's equal to Y minus T, that's disposable income, minus C.
Y minus T, was that income minus taxes? So it's for your disposable income, minus C is?
Government saving is taxes minus government expenditure. So if the government has a deficit, that thing is negative.
Okay.
Governments often have negative saving, okay? If it has a surplus, then taxes are greater than G, then you have a fiscal surplus. Again, rarely happens in the US or in the Americas in general, okay? It happens a lot in Asia, but doesn't happen very much in this part of the world. But there we are. So in equilibrium, investment, I, has to be equal to saving. So that's what you are going to use the saving for, to invest, okay? So investment is equal to the sum of savings. I can replace all that in here, and you see that I get exactly the same equilibrium condition I had before. Okay. Output equal to aggregate demand, okay? So this is an entirely equivalent way of deriving this, and I just want to show you this because it's the way it was originally done, and you'll understand better the terminology we use later on if you see that this is an equivalent way. This is also a nice way of illustrating something, why macro can be counterintuitive sometimes. Microeconomics is very intuitive. I mean, things make sense.
Loser.
It's like physics, it makes sense. Macro can be confusing. For example, there's the well-known paradox of saving in the short run, not in the long run. In the short run, you have the paradox of saving. We use the way in demand, okay?
This is known as the IS relation. What does IS relation mean? What is IS? Investment savings or the determination of equilibrium output? Investment saving. Oh, okay, cringe. Okay.
Makes sense. No? It's like physics. It makes sense. Macro is saving in the short run.
All right.
For example, there's the well-known paradox of saving in the short run, not in the long run. In the short run, you have the paradox of saving. So, we all think that you save more is a good thing. Our parents teach us that it's a good thing to save more and so on. And in general, that is true. You'll do better in life if you save a little more and so on. But it's not true for the macro in the short run. It's not good for macroeconomics in the short run, unless you are in an overheated economy. Now it could help. But otherwise, it's not very good for equilibrium output. And let me show you that very quickly with the expression I just showed you. Remember I said equilibrium output is pinned down by investment equal to saving. And the saving of the private saving here is an increasing function of output, okay? It's equal to actually 1 minus C. The function has a slope of 1 minus C1. C1 is the share of income that you spend in consumption. Therefore, 1 minus C1 is the share of your income that you spend in saving, okay? So this function is increasing with a slope of 1 minus C1. So suppose I tell you now that all we decided to learn the lessons of our parents and say, okay, we should all save more. So that means for any given level of income, now we all decide to save more. That
My professor? Huh, you don't want to know what class we're in today, guys. Let me tell you about my professor. Huh. Huh.
That means the S function shift up. For any given level of income, we save more. But we have a problem there because now we have more saving than investment. So how do we restore equilibrium? That's not an equilibrium. How do we restore equilibrium?
I mean, the consumption goes down? Is it, what's the, is there
So now we all decide to be more prudent and save a little more. At the level of the economy as a whole, now we have more saving than investment. That can happen. It's not an equilibrium.
Okay.
What restores equilibrium? Well, in this very simple model, our investment is fixed, so nothing can adjust on the investment side because it's fixed.
Okay.
Later on, it's going to move, but now it's fixed.
So output has to go down. Production, aggregate demand, output?
Nothing can adjust in the public saving part because it can't move. We assume that it's exogenous. So something has to happen endogenously here that reverses the increase in savings. It's the only thing that can happen. And the only thing that can happen endogenously here is a decline in output.
Okay.
Output declines, saving decline. So here you end up in a situation in which we all decided to be sort of better people, save a little more, and we end up sinking the economy in a recession. Yeah? Output decline.
Wow.
Okay, that's the reason it's called the paradox of saving.
No.
That's not going to happen to you individually, but to an economy as a whole, that's the reason I said it's counterintuitive. It can happen.
Stop saving, losers.
Look, if you don't like this way of, and it's not the main way we're going to use it. If you don't like this way of finding equilibrium output, just ignore it. I just wanted you to know it. Go back to the thing you really need to understand is not this, it's this, that, that you need to understand.
Gotcha.
So let me illustrate the paradox of saving in the model we're using, in the one I want you to really remember. Well, the paradox of saving I can capture by a decline in C0. Okay? For any given level of income, now we decide to consume less. If we consume less for any given level of income, that means we're saving more. Okay?
Okay.
So I can capture in this diagram the fact that we have all become sort of more prudent by a decline in aggregate demand. But if aggregate demand declines, so suppose we start at this equilibrium level of output and then all of a sudden we say, okay, enough is enough, we need to start saving more. Then what happens? Well, aggregate demand declines. I mean, for any given level of income, if you're going to save more, that means you're going to consume less, so aggregate demand declines. But what happens when aggregate demand declines?
Now you produce less.
Output declines.
Yeah. And
what
then
happens when output declines?
the income also declines.
Income declines.
And then,
What happens when income declines?
oh my God, another one.
Well, part of that income you consume, so you're going to consume less. C1 times that. So then, and then you get the multiplier working against you. So not only, if now we all decide to save more, not only output falls by the same amount that we increase savings, but actually declines by more than that, because you get the multiplier working against you.
Wow.
Okay? That's the reason a big role of policymakers really in recession is to try to maintain the calm, because you can get into these kind of things. If everybody gets scared and we all get scared, so the economy can implode just out of bad sentiment and so on. Now, we're on the opposite side of the cycle. We would want output to decline a little because we are having other problems, inflation and so on. Again, something we'll discuss later. So now you may want to scare consumers a little.
Yeah,
and in fact,
be scared, be afraid.
The governors of the Federal Reserve, and the same is happening in other places in the world, are doing just that. I mean, when they go out there, says the economy is too hot, we're going to have to mess up this economy a little. And they're telling us that. And the first ones that listen to these things is the financial markets. So every time they come out and make a speech of that kind, equity markets decline. Well, equity markets captured before the mood that consumers will have in the future. They capture it early, but that's the message. Okay? So they're trying to, at this moment, really, policymakers, at least the central banks, are trying to do just that. Depress a little bit consumers. So we can cool off the economy a bit. Okay. Any questions? Again, very important lecture because we're going to build on this, and later on, this is going to be always in the background.
Let's go, guys.
Of this, until we actually go to the third part of the course, the key model will be this. This will be in the background. More things will be happening on top.
I think there's going to be 2 questions.
But whenever I ask you a question,
I believe in this class.
For example, later on, one example. What else would produce
Never mind, one question.
A situation like this?
What else would produce a situation like this? I don't remember how this means our C0 is falling. What else would cause the C0 to fall, or what else would cause?
What else would, what could happen? What kind of policy would generate that movement? Well, at this point, we haven't introduced monetary policy, so you cannot talk about monetary policy.
Yeah, fuck you.
But we do have other kind of policy we could talk about.
What about high taxes and low government spending? That's my guess. Oh my God, this guy's skipping through so many slides.
Here, fiscal policy.
Oh.
Okay? Fiscal policy, G and T. Those are fiscal parameters. When G goes down or T goes up, we call that contractionary fiscal policy.
High taxes and low government spending.
Why contractionary?
The meme name for this is austerity.
Down or T goes up, we call that contractionary fiscal policy. Why contractionary? Because it contracts aggregate demand. If G goes down, clearly aggregate demand goes down immediately. If T goes up, well, disposable income for any given level of income goes down, and therefore consumption goes down. So we call a decline in G or an increase in T a contractionary fiscal policy. The opposite, if G goes up and T goes down, we call that an expansionary fiscal policy. So I take you back to this diagram here, and I ask you the question again.
Yes.
What
high taxes with no more government spending.
What kind of fiscal policy will generate this picture? Contractionary or expansionary?
Contraction, contracted. Come on, where are these students at? This poor guy, he just needs one answer. Just one.
Contractionary.
There you go.
I mean,
Thank
good
you.
mnemonic, the output decline.
The bro in the class.
So contractionary, so that is a reduction in G, in government expenditure, or an increase in taxes
right? Wow.
will shift that curve down, and then the multiplier will make it even more contractionary than the initial fiscal impulse. Okay?
Okay.
Very good. I'll see you on Wednesday.
Good job, guys. Next we do the financial market. Do we know enough to do the problem sets? The goods market. Oh yeah, I think we do. Question 1, economic data. 35 points. This question will ask you to get familiar with economic data, plotting it, and drawing conclusions. Please use the Federal Reserve Economic Data database maintained by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Link here. For your reference, note that the National Bureau of Economic Research is the entity that dates the business cycles in the United States. I didn't know that. Please be precise about what units you are using, and don't forget to include a title and axis labels in all charts. You can use any software you'd like, e.g. Excel is fine. Fuck, I don't have any of that shit. Download and plot the series of U.S. real gross domestic product, code GDPC1, billions of change 2020 or $20 annual rate at a quarterly frequency. Can you, is open, what's it called? Open Office? Is Open Office like, I could just buy Excel actually. I should just do that. Wait, is Open Office better or is Excel the best? Just buy Excel, it's $50 a year? Wait, what? You have to do a subscription? You can't, they software as a service to fucking Excel? Buying Microsoft Excel. Fuck you, I don't believe you. Hold on. Also, can I download and use this without having to be logged into fucking Microsoft? Oh, 180. Okay, no, you can buy this. Okay. All right, I'll have this set up for tomorrow. Okay, we'll buy Excel. I should, and then I can graph things anyway. This is actually probably a good life skill. Set up Microsoft Excel. Okay. Why not Google Sheets? I don't think Google Sheets has anywhere near the capabilities as Excel does, or that LibreOffice bullshit. What? Dan linked this. Oh, this is old. This is Mr. Girl thinking that he had his own. I feel like every schizo does this at some point. You get like a theory of everything where you can describe the entire fucking universe.
Hey, that's not me. That's an observer. He's going to guide us through our physics journey. Every observer perceives their own unique version of events hours apart, and there's some really far away place where the set to different times.
I never saw it. Yeah, this was an arc from Mr. Girl. I think, was it like a year and a half ago where he figured out that he saw like the whole universe exists on a two-dimensional edge of a black hole, and he basically figured out, he said he solved everything. Okay.
In this little bottle of Dr. Pepper, there are 15 teaspoons of sugar. There's no warning label here telling you this is really something that kids should not be drinking, that has a whole lot of calories in this. This is 240 calories right in this one bottle. So the industry has done a very good job in selling us products that are cheap to produce and make us unhealthy, and that's something Congress has got to deal with.
Bernie Sanders is one of the loudest voices in the room when it comes to ultra-processed food, and now he's pushing for warning labels on ultra-processed products. He's here with me today to talk about his plans. I'm Mia DeGraff, health editor at Business Insider. The first thing that I want to talk about to do with transparency, I think it's a bit of a black box that for your average citizen, it's hard to understand what stronghold industry lobbyists have over US politics and our food system.
Major industries in this country, whether it's financial services or in healthcare or in food, spend huge amounts of money on campaign contributions. So they give you a lot of money when you run for Congress, and that gives them access to you in a way that ordinary citizens do not have. So they can come in and say, look, these are my problems, this is what I need, and you know what, I did put $50,000 through our super PAC into your campaign. Furthermore, they have lobbyists running all over Washington, D.C. And often these lobbyists are very well paid, they're very smart, in some cases, former leaders of the Democratic or Republican Party. So they have clout. Oh, you know, I was in Congress, I know what you're going through, and here's really what you got to be doing.
When it comes to other countries, are there in nutrition policy, are there any that you're envious of?
Sure. I mean, there are many countries that are way ahead of where we are. I just give you one example. This is a bottle of Coca-Cola in the United States. No nutritional information, no warning label. This is one in Mexico, and I don't know that Mexico is doing more than.
What? In the United States, there are no nutritional labels on sodas? Or does it just mean no warning label about sugar? Okay.
Envious of?
Sure. I mean, there are many countries that are way ahead of where we are. I just give you one example.
Yeah, did he forget to rotate the bottle? Like, I don't
Let's see,
know.
are there any that...
Of Coca-Cola in the United States. No nutritional information, no warning label. This is one in Mexico, and I don't know that Mexico is doing more than other countries. It says excess sugars, excess calories, caffeine warning, not recommended for children. And there are other countries that are going further. So what we need to do is when a parent goes out shopping, they need to know that there are products that are just not healthy for their kids. In the United States, we have not reached that stage. Other countries are doing a lot better than we are.
I think I mentioned this in Europe, or at least in the UK. I think they do this, or was it Sweden? The idea that there are warning labels on things that have a high percentage of calories from sugar. I think that they'll warn like a certain amount of calories per a thing from sugar. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think you should go a step further and just tax it more too. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having those warning labels. As stupid as it sounds, people do make different decisions when they see shit like that.
What do you say to concerns that the front of package labels are just going to be a distraction that might delay further action?
I think it's one thing that you've got to do. It's important for parents to know what the health impact is of the products they're buying for their kids. I mean, that's kind of common sense. I think if most parents knew that there were, again, 15 teaspoons of sugar in this drink, I suspect many parents would say, sorry, Joe, you can't have that. And it would put pressure on the industry to stop producing healthier products.
Apparently significantly affected parents' choices. Yeah, I think again, they sound dumb, but the labels do matter. And I don't know all the time too. I think in the UK they'll do it like per 100 grams. This is whatever percentage. It was a sticker like this, and I just remember seeing it. I was like, oh, this is like a nice idea. Like you can immediately tell like, oh, this is like super sugary, and this is not as sugary or whatever. It was some like label like that. I thought it was helpful. Yeah, I think stuff like this is fine.
Sorry, Joe, you can't have that. And it would put pressure on the industry to stop producing healthier products.
Speaking about industry reform, I have to ask you about RFK Jr., who's been nominated for HHS Secretary. He says he's going to overhaul our food system and specifically remove processed food from school meals. Do you think that's doable? Where do you agree and disagree?
Well, I think a lot of what RFK is saying is kind of crazy and driven by conspiracy theories. Some of what he's saying is not crazy. I think the fact that in America now we have an obesity epidemic, 40% of adults are obese, 20% of kids.
It says how much sugar is in the nutrition facts. What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, but you don't know the percentage of calories from sugar in terms of like what's healthy and what's not healthy. You just don't have a concept of it. And I guess in the UK or in Europe, they just set like an arbitrary percentage where like this much is going to be too much and you're going to get a sticker for it. And I think that's totally fine. I think that's okay. I think it's good. Hold on, people linking. I feel like this is not what I remember, but also I don't. I thought it was a different thing, but maybe it was this. I don't know. But yeah, I think things like this are nice. Yeah, I think this is fine. I think this is good. I think this would be a good addition to our foods, 100%. And it's all standardized to 100 grams, or it's standardized to this thing too. Yeah, servings in the United States are so fucking annoying and tricky and cringe because like if I tell you like there's 20 grams of sugar in this, is that good or bad? Who knows? I don't know. We have no fucking idea. I don't know. What is the total weight of the thing, right? You don't know. I think I have a Gatorade in the fridge. Like they still do trigger things where it's like, fuck, no, wait, what was it? Hold on. Did they do this on Hershey bars? a Hershey bar is only, it'll say like 120 calories. Like I just, from the random dieting memes in the past, I can look at it and I was like, and I looked at the bag, I was like, I'm just curious how, like, oh, look, nah, that's so tricky. I saw this, yeah, when I bought a thing and it's like 120 calories. I'm like, for a whole ass candy bar? Wait, what? But it's not, it's per serving, and a serving is considered 1/3 of the pack. But nobody eats 1/3 of a pack of a Hershey's candy bar. So yeah, this stuff is this is memey as fuck that people do this. This is so memey. Yeah. Yeah, the US is really weird about shit like this. It should be clear.
We have an obesity epidemic. 40% of adults are obese. 20% of kids are obese. And that is directly related to the epidemic we have in diabetes. So you have millions and millions of people struggling with diabetes. Many of them are overweight. And it is costing us an estimated $400 billion a year to deal with diabetes, a huge amount of money. So it goes without saying that anybody with a brain in his or her head wants to deal with issues, get to the cause of the problem. And I think processed food and the kind of sugar and salt that we have in products that our kids and adults are ingesting is an important part of addressing that crisis.
Could you explain what the stakes are and why Americans should care about this matter?
When Kennedy talks about an unhealthy society, he's right. The amount of chronic illness that we have is just extraordinary. The obesity rates have risen for kids 3 times since the 19...
Just to be clear, Kennedy is not right. And him attributing this to weird food dyes or heavy metal bullshit or whatever is bullshit. What Bernie is talking about is a generalized concept that we could probably have like less simple sugar food is a generally good idea. It'd probably help us on a general trend a lot.
70s, so we're getting more and more obese, which leads to all kinds of other health-related problems. We have a problem right now actually recruiting young people into the military because of health-related issues. Our kids are not healthy enough. So in the long run, you want a healthy society as an end in itself. We want our people to have long lives, productive lives, happy lives. That's what we want. And if the industry is giving our kids food that is making them overweight, leading to diabetes and other illnesses, clearly that's an issue that we've got to deal with.
How'd you get here?
Oh, this is a super Sweatstiny episode. Okay. I love you guys. This feels like the triangle again. We want cost and speed for food, so we sacrifice quality. No, food is like a rare thing where I think you actually can have like a win-win-win thing on it. Like food doesn't have to be this zero-sum game where it's like, oh no, if we make food a little bit healthier, it's gonna fuck over. It's going to fuck over like how good it tastes or whatever. That's not true. You can have food that you can prepare easily, that you can buy cheaply, that's not like crazy fucking overloaded in insane amounts of sugar. Like they don't do that just because it's cheaper, although it might be a tad cheaper. They just do it because it makes it taste really, really good and really, really addictive. But if the entirety of all the food in your food economy like decreases things like sugary levels, like everything will still taste on the aggregate about the same. There's a reason why if you drink like a fuck ton of soda, it's really hard to drink water because water is really fucking boring. But if you don't drink much soda at all, and then you try to drink, a sugary soda, it's actually fairly difficult because it'll like if you take somebody from a country or from an area who doesn't drink soda at all and you give them a Coke and they drink it, they won't be able to drink the whole Coke. It will be unbearable because it is incredibly, incredibly sugary. But we are very accustomed to, we're very, very, very accustomed right now to, Jesus Christ, to sugary stuff in our food economy right now. Okay, we'll do this real quick. Ray factor, lighter, stain, microscope, games, consideration, magnifying glass, reflection, matches, slide, thought, flint, files, scrutiny, and specimen. Did you factor this in? Did you give this consideration? Did you give it a thought? Did you give it scrutiny? Ways of considering things? Oh, come on. Upon further reflection? Did you factor? Deliberation, okay. God, I'm so fucking smart. Okay. Ray. Slide, files, stain. Specimen, things that you look at under a microscope? Would you include microscope? Like a stain, a slide, a specimen, and a... What the fuck? Microscope. This is not... Used to view a biological sample. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. Things that make fire? Seems really easy. Right? I think that's what flint is used for, right? And then matches, and then a lighter, and I mean, I guess you could use a magnifying glass, right? Okay. Oh, and these are TV shows or something. X Factor, X Files, X Games, X Ray. Words after X, oh, whatever. The X font, X Ray, X Games. 3 of these are TV shows, right? No, the X Games is an actual competition. X Games is not a TV show, right? It's an actual... a thing, I think? Oh, okay. Okay. Real quick. Just throw it a 950 and then we're done for the night. Okay. Shh.